Have you checked the children? Your little master.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I'm known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on Hey-oh, yeah! To Stephen King. That's Reezy, obviously, Bevenidos, and welcome to the horror show. And Sai King, my favorite author, as you can see by the Tower of Tomes behind me. And yes, I'm nearing 300 episodes of this show. Just, right at the end of the year, I think is when it's going to hit. And so lots of stuff has been covered over the years. Most recently, we did a live happy birthday to Sai King, this being the month of Septiembre, his birthday on the 21st, just one day after mine, just celebrated Cecil's as well. So yeah, September is always a month of just all kinds of adoration for El Rey. And lots of his stuff is actually, as far as prolific releases go, has hit in September, both of the book variety and of the adaptation variety. And today, for its 20th anniversary, we're talking about Hearts in Atlantis. That's easy, guys. Hearts in Atlantis. And so this was adapted just 2 years after the book, which it's essentially loosely adapting two parts of the book Hearts in Atlantis that was released September 14th in 99. And then 2 years later, on this exact day, September 28th, it was released to theaters, starred Sir Anthony Hopkins, who, I mean, goes without saying just how much of a legend he is, especially with just getting another Academy Award win for The Father, which was fantastic and really depressing and just intriguing, amazing performance. But I mean, his resume is ridiculous between Legends of the Fall and Amistad and Nixon and obviously Hannibal Lecter, which he is probably most notorious for, The Elephant Man. I mean, he was in Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know, and so, he's been in so much stuff, and his reputation precedes him, obviously. But a tragic person to discuss, unfortunately, is who plays our young Bobby Garfield, Anton Yelchin, and he gives, I think it was like 11, I mean, he was 12 when the film came out, but he was probably 11 when they were filming this, and seriously, he is terrific in this. The chemistry between the two of them is just impeccable, and you have to just give a lot of sad respect to the dearly departed Anton, who went on to do so many awesome things. I mean, between Charlie Bartlett and Odd Thomas, and he was Chekhov in those new Star Trek movies. He was great in the Fright Night remake. I mean, he was incredibly talented and lost in that tragic vehicle accident. It was like a defective parking brake or something, so really, really tragic in that regard. But yeah, and then you have Hope Davis playing Bobby Garfield's mother in this, and I was like, I know she was very prominent in like the 2000s, and I think I saw her in Greenland last year, but Arlington Road, she was in About Schmidt, and she was very active in like the 90s and the 2000s. She popped up in a lot of stuff, and she plays this kind of bitchy, speculative, distrusting mother of Anton Yelchin's Bobby. And then lastly, the actress who plays Carol Gerber, Mika Buram. She doesn't get as much screen time, but she's got great chemistry with Anton as well. They just have this sweetness about them, and that's the thing. I adore this movie. I know it's significantly condensing a lot, and the actual source material, Hearts in Atlantis, this, as I said, is combining two stories, so it's essentially Low Men in Yellow Coats, which is the first and the longest novella in the Hearts in Atlantis collection, and then it also does, it's Twilight Time, gosh, I'm trying to remember. Heavenly Shades of Night Are Falling. It's Twilight Time. Great song, referenced in The Dark Tower at one particular point as well. But yeah, so that's the final story where we meet Bobby all grown up. And so the film essentially takes those two narratives, trims the Dark Tower stuff out, because especially Low Men in Yellow Coats, it is big time Crimson King minions, and just it's very much along the path of the meme. Not to say that this film is not, and there's like a wink or two here or there, but this is one of the few stories, and I think very similar to Insomnia, if that was to see a screen adaptation either for television in a limited series format or something, or in a slightly condensed movie sort of situation. I think that this story works without the tower elements. It's not ultimately necessary, especially with some of the alterations about Ted Brodigan, who Anthony Hopkins plays, his abilities, what they entail, and why there's people after him. So if this is one that, while it's enhanced significantly for tower junkies like myself in the book, I mean, ultimately, I don't think it is crucial for this story to be enjoyable to the more casual audience. And that's why I think this story works so very well, because it's King, yes, kind of retreading some territory. I know in the book it's 1960 Connecticut, and I just rewatched this film, but I don't think at any point they actually say a specific year. It's just, we meet David Morse at the very beginning of the film, and so he's grown up Bobby. He's another King vet. He was the captain in the Langoliers, and then he was also one of the more kind of sympathetic sort of guards, I guess. Well, actually, no, I'm trying to remember which guard he was specifically in the Green Mile. But no, he wasn't Percy. Well, in any event, he already had 2 different King things under his belt when he did this. And so Morse is great as the grown-up Bobby, finding out his friend Sully has tragically died, and then he goes back for the funeral, and that's where we kick into gear for just reminiscing about that particular summer, the friendship between Bobby and Ted, his cute little romance with the Gerber baby, with the heart of a lion, Carol, and Sully. He really takes a back seat in this as being like the third part of their little trio, but yes, so it's back to King's childhood, kind of, and that sort of wistful reminiscence, so to speak, that King writes so very well, and it's beautifully shot. The cinematographer unfortunately passed away shortly before the release of this, but Scott Hicks, I think, is the director, if I remember correctly, and so he received a lot of notoriety for a musical biopic he did called Shine that received a couple Academy Awards, and then the screenwriter for this was none other than William Goldman, who had 2 Oscars under his belt already for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and also for All the President's Men, but that dude was prolific. He also wrote novels. He wrote stage plays, the novels that got adapted, like The Princess Bride, and I mean, the dude was insanely prolific, sadly no longer with us, but a long, storied career. So there was a hefty amount of talent behind this film between, Sir Anthony Hopkins, obviously, and the director and the screenwriter. So all pieces were in place for this to be a big sort of Stephen King dramatic adaptation, something that I think it's comparable as far as just its execution and the tremendousness of acting, and yet the simplicity and the relatability of the storytelling. I think this is on par with stuff like Stand By Me and Shawshank and The Green Mile, both of those being vastly different in comparison. This has more in the DNA of Stand By Me, obviously, and it's got some vibes of it, and there's even one scene in particular where it's like a shot that is looking down this like shadowy, almost like under bridge corridor sort of thing that looked almost to a T like a shot from 2017's Andy Muschietti film. So I was just like, huh. So you can totally feel the vibes. Unfortunately, though, this one did not at least get the sort of audience and critical recognition that I personally think that it deserves, because it's only like 49% on Rotten Tomatoes, and despite the fact that it says on the front of this 2 big thumbs up, Ebert and Roper, 2 thumbs up used to be a big thing when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, and even into the 2000s after the loss of Gene Siskel, which was really tragic, obviously, and Richard Roper stepped in to, continue doing that, at the movies, thumbs up, thumbs down show along with Roger. But, it received high praise from a few noteworthy critics, but as far as the mass consensus for it to only be 49%, I think it's only at 5 and some change on Metacritic as well. And also at the box office, they spent $31 million on this, and between domestic and international, it was just barely under the threshold of making its budget back. And everybody knows that you take the budget and you times it by 2 because of, marketing and promotion. And so in all actuality, this film lost money, which is a bummer, and it's kind of forgotten in the pantheon of King adaptations, which I think really stinks because it's pretty close to great in my opinion. And yes, it is rather short. It clocks in right at 100 minutes, but Castle Rock Entertainment, once again, Rob Reiner's company that did so many different adaptations of King stuff between Dolores Claiborne and obviously various others over the years, Misery and whatnot. I guess I'm just going to quote all the Kathy Bates ones that come to mind right off the bat, and I know they did a vast amount of others for both television and for film. But yeah, this is one that I sadly think is kind of just lost in the pantheon in a lot of ways, but I still think it's tremendous. And the opening line that we get when we are with adult Bobby, and he finds out that when he is sent this glove that his buddy Sully had, and he's like, okay, gotta go back to this funeral. And when we have our first bit of introspective narrated dialogue from Bobby's character, he says, when it wants, the past can come kicking the door down, and you never know where it's gonna take you. All you can do is hope it's a place you want to go. And there's lots of interesting ruminations between Bobby doesn't really do it as a kid, so it's not full-on narration like we get in Stand By Me at times, but it's very evocative of that. I think this was kind of taking some cues in that sort of structuring as well, between, being the adult and, just looking back with that fondness and that reminiscence and stuff like that. So I've already touched on the terrific performances. What's funny? I had totally forgotten that Alan Tudyk is in this. He only has one scene, and everybody knows Tudyk, from so many things, from voice work, K2SO, in the best thing that Disney has done since acquiring Lucasfilms, being Rogue One, but I mean, various other things, Firefly and Serenity, obviously, and he's got that new show on Sci-Fi where he's playing an alien in a human's body. He's terrific in that, but very, very prolific voice actor and screen actor. The guy is awesome. And the scene, there's a couple of really terrific scenes in this, but the tension that Tudyk brings when Bobby Garfield, he's at the carnival with Carol and Sully, and Carol's mom is the one who's taken them, and they do a little just small wagering on a card game, and Tudyk's character is shuffling, and yet Bobby has kind of taken a little bit, it's almost like a rub from, that sounds terrible, especially with all the presumptions that Bobby's mother gets, but he's a little bit of Ted's shine, touch, I guess, has rubbed off on, it still sounds terrible, on Bobby, and so that's why he is able to win some dinero and truly piss off Tudyk's character, who is this, carnival shyster of sorts. And that's where I think that they handle this very well, in the fact that, Brodigan, who becomes very prolific later in the Dark Tower, specifically Book 7, as a breaker, and, if you don't know what that is, that's probably better, because I guess that is a slight bit of a spoiler, but yes, Ted does show up in the books again, and it's in kind of a pivotal role as far as, the whole scheme of things of the Sai King multiverse, and so, but he is this guy who is kind of in hiding, kind of on the run, but has a natural shine, touch to him of sorts, kind of a, psychic sixth sense, whatever the hell you want to classify it as. And so he moves above in the building that Bobby and his mother live in. Bobby's father is deceased. And so this is another story, if you read If It Bleeds, Mr. Harrigan's Phone, this has a very similar vibe, and so that's another reason why people criticize King sometimes, and they're like, yeah, he rehashes a lot of ideas. So this is another one, about a writer, and then flashing back to, reminiscing about your childhood, and, there's bullies, once again, who kind of, mess with Carol and Sully and Bobby, and also a friendship, and this is where King is obviously going to the well of his own personal experience, because his dad didn't die, but he ran off and was never heard from again. Who knows what the hell happened to him? And so, yes, King, I believe, continues just getting reacquainted with this subject, because it still resonates so significantly within him. The fact that, a young boy without a father that's looking for a father figure, and that's what Bobby finds in this dude who is laying low, laying low from the low men. And there's times initially where before the evidence, I guess, of Ted's abilities are like spelled out, so to speak, and you get that first hint when Bobby is at the carnival and stuff, but it's really not laid out specifically until later in the third act of the film. And so initially you're like, okay, is he hiding from the law, or are these low men guys that want to break his legs for gambling debts or something like that? So for the general audience, especially those who have not actually read the Hearts in Atlantis book, it's interesting to kind of theorize about what Ted might be running from. And of course, Bobby's mother speculates about not just that, but all kinds of nefarious things that he could potentially be doing. Is he he's got the touch, is he touching my son, and terrible things like that. But yeah, so it just kind of, it turns into a really sweet kind of, stand-in father-son, grandfatherly in this case, obviously, but it turns into a really sweet friendship between the two of them. And yet, as things really start to become more and more clear, you start to realize that there is a potential, because I'm not trying to super spoiler this film, but there is a potential expiration date, and you don't know, because there's not only these men after him, but also seems like Bobby's mom, who is working for this kind of sleazy boss, and could she orchestrate something, because she has it out for him, even if she is letting Bobby work for $1 a week reading him the newspaper because his eyesight's failing, stuff like that. But yeah, there are a few really touching and intriguing scenes. One in particular that I had forgotten about until this rewatch was about this gentleman. Now, I didn't research to see if he was an actual athlete. I'm assuming he is, because King loves his baseball and his football. But Bronco Nagurski, and it's this older football player who kind of disappeared off the map and then came out of retirement in this game between the Cardinals and the Bears. And it's described by Brodigan as the way he willed his team to victory was just the sheer unrelenting, just, I don't know, going the distance and just digging deep in all those sports cliches about where you muster your power, your willpower, all that different stuff. And you start to even the way they edit it, as Anthony Hopkins is giving this tremendous monologue and Anton Yelchin's character is in awe as it's all being recanted to him, you can hear the sports noises of the crowd and some stuff like that in the background. So you really do think you're right there as Brodigan is telling this incredibly inspiring story, which is very cool. And so that actually comes into play in the third act when something happens to Carol, and Bobby has to really step up and dig deep, and once again all of those sports cliches and stuff like that after something goes down with the bullies that have tormented them. So I've been gushing and gushing, obviously. If there is anything about this that, as a big fan of the book, I guess does bum me out, but it's just me, it's grasping for straws, nitpicking sort of situation, is the fact that it is a little short, and I feel like there is an underdevelopment, first and foremost, of Sully. They don't really do much of anything with him. He only talks a couple times in the whole thing, and so the resonance of the friendship, which brings Bobby as an adult back to his hometown, I could see it feeling a little flat to some, it was just kind of going through the motions at times in this film. It's really, and even the Carol relationship, it's got this really sweet scene on the Ferris wheel when they're at the carnival, and it's after the whole dust up with Tudyk's character, the shyster dude, and they kiss on the Ferris wheel, and it's honestly one of those just noteworthy moments of Americana, really, and just childhood in general. They have this sweet little first kiss, and then Bobby gives that classic line, which I do believe is in the novel as well, where he's like, a kiss that all others will be measured by, because your first kiss as a kid, especially if it has that sweetness with the childhood crush and stuff like that, where just everything seems perfect in that moment. And it's beautifully shot, and the chemistry between the two of them is very cute. And admittedly, I'm a sucker for, very similar to Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews, I'm a sucker for a good coming-of-age story. It's why The Body / Stand By Me resonates so much as well, as does it. And anytime King sort of tackles this sort of grown, I guess this is growing up sort of situation, especially when it's done with a sincerity and a sweetness that King has always excelled at, and just brought that feeling of just absolute genuineness. And so those are a couple of my absolute favorite scenes. And another one is where, Bobby's mom badmouths his deceased father the entire film, and about how he was this horrible gambler and just bad with money and all this different stuff. And yet in the third act, Bobby ends up with Ted at a seedy establishment, as I guess a lot of people would assess it to be. And it's where bets are placed and where pool is shot and beer is drank and cigarettes are smoked, a den of iniquity sort of thing. And yet he's recognized by this bartender woman, and she basically is like, no, your father would never buy a drunk a drink. Your father was always very sweet and generous, and it just really, it means so much to Bobby to hear a completely different perspective about the father that he barely even remembers in comparison with the negativity that his mother is constantly hammering home. And that's one thing, man. I mean, Hope Davis, I just want to double check her name, really sells kind of the cruel and the nastiness and the bad decision making, and she's great in this. She really, really is. And she finds herself in kind of a really bad situation with her boss, and that's in the third act. There is another great scene where it's basically paralleling two different scenes of female abuse, and the way that it's interspersed is really, it's soul crushing, and yet it is very profoundly effective. And so that's, hats off to Scott, the director, and also his editing team for just the way that they assembled that scene. It just really, it nails it, and it just gets the sadness and the despair of all of that in proper place. And yet the mother, even after everything, and Ted has made so much leeway, she's still distrusting. And she says at one point, trust him about as far as I could sling a piano. And then Bobby even takes that line later on and uses it to a different effect, which is great. I've covered so much as far as praising the acting and just the look of the film, the cinematography and everything. Wherever they ended up filming this, I couldn't find it as I was searching like Wikipedia and whatever. If it's not, Bridgeport or that area of Connecticut, it's still beautiful New England, or maybe it's up in like the Toronto area or somewhere in Eastern Canada, because I know that's a stand-in for this part of the United States that they're supposed to be portraying. But as things ramp up and you find out a little bit more about the people that are after Brodigan, these low men, and how he says, if you start seeing peculiar, like lost pet flyers that are showing up, that's like our big red flag, and Crimson King flag for anybody who really truly knows. And so that's that. You just know that it's going to build to a head, and either Brodigan he's going to have to escape at some particular point, and it's really the mystery of, if he escapes, will he be tracked down, what the circumstances that surround said escape will be, and who's going to orchestrate them. Is it going to be something he chooses to do on his own, or are they going to be so close on his heels, so to speak, that he's just going to have to peace out? And it's a terrific film, and the sheer fact that they could trim so much, and yes, I do love the Hearts in Atlantis novellas 2, 3, and 4 in the book, where you follow Carol to college in Hearts in Atlantis, the title story, and then Blind Willie, who is somebody who is tied in with Carol, and then you also have While We're in Vietnam, which is another story that you basically catch up with Sully, who ended up going to the Vietnam War. And so if you like this film, this adaptation, and you're not familiar with the actual source material itself, yes, it may be a little tougher if you're not supremely familiar with those Dark Tower tie-in stuff, but I still feel like, as a rumination on the time in which that King matured, and also Hearts in Atlantis is basically about King's college experience, like to a T, and you want to find out what happens to these characters from this film, basically fill in all the gaps that this film kind of bookends, I suppose. I highly recommend picking up Hearts in Atlantis and checking it out. It starts out with that line from Easy Rider, "We blew it." So this film is great, and just the fact that they were able to make it accessible, psychics versus communists, and just a little clarification about the abilities of Ted Brodigan that is so masterfully played by Sir Anthony Hopkins. And the music, lastly, we always touch upon that at least. It's also great. You know, you've got Only You, and you've got Sleepwalking, you've got Ain't That a Shame, and then you've got Come On Baby. So you've got a great soundtrack of the era as well, and so that just makes everything even more appealing. And so yes, I adore Hearts in Atlantis. They still have not put out like a full-on like deluxe release, although this is not a bare bones on this DVD that I have. There is a full-length audio commentary with director Scott Hicks, and then there's also Scott Hicks interviewing Anthony Hopkins, which is great. And then you've got some stills and, you know, cast filmmaker profiles, yada yada yada. But the fact that there is some supplemental material on here, I really appreciate, because yeah, it's kind of a lost art at this particular point with a lot of different home releases, as things are going so much more digital as opposed to, I mean, there's still peeps like Scream Factory and, you know, Arrow and various others that are still carrying that flag for all kinds of bonuses and extras and stuff like that, which I adore. That's why I still possess so much physical media. But Hearts in Atlantis, man, if you haven't checked it out, whether you have read the book and you were kind of just averse to it because of the fact that you know they're trimming so much stuff, I think it's less trimmed and more so streamlined and more accessible to both fans of the book and to those casual, just mainstream people who are like, oh, a lot of people would watch this and they would have no idea it was written by Stephen King. The same goes for various others, you know, between Stand By Me, Shawshank, Green Mile, at least that has a little bit more of a horror element to it, I suppose. But yeah, this is another one that is just full-on drama, has some very sweet, endearing sort of comedic moments too. And if you, especially if you grew up in this era, you will be taken right back, and it's gonna hit you in the feels. I guarantee it. So I extend a grande gracias, everyone. I've been Jaime and Fuego, and you can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube. And I'm very much looking forward to next Tuesday when we are going to be discussing, you can actually see it back there, Desperation, for its, 25th anniversary, which is very exciting. And it's going to be live at, I believe it's still going to be 3 p.m. Pacific, at 6 p.m. Eastern. But I'm very much looking forward to hitting up the Twitter book of The Regulators, which was our last live installment. And yes, I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, and a like, a share, a subscribe for this program. It means a hell of a lot and helps us keep the lights on. So I have been Jaime and Fuego. Y'all have been Rad Status. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, and amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I am hopeful that we have been well met and that we get to share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. If you haven't read Hearts in Atlantis, definitely get to it. But you could really watch this and then just get a more interesting, expanded story in the collection of novellas.